We're going to get started. Okay, Rhonda? Ron? Okay. Okay, so we'd like to say, first of all, good morning. Good to see everybody. The last few lectures have been on very theological topics. Today is a little different. Today is going to be about a novel, and the main themes aren't so much theological as about Jewish identity, anti-Semitism, pro-Semitism, Zionism, etc. I'm going to start with a story from my own ancient past. I grew up, as you probably know by now, in Seattle, Washington. In the good old days, Seattle had a day school, Jewish day school till 8th grade. And then those of us who graduated from there either came back east for yeshiva or stayed in Seattle and went to public school. I was in the latter category. I went to public school for 9th through 12th grades. And I have to say, it was a great blessing. It was a wonderful experience in many, many ways. However, also caused some moments of anxiety. So for example, in 10th grade, in my English literature class, we had to study some Shakespeare. And our teacher, of all the plays she could have chosen, she chose The Merchant of Venice. I wish she didn't, but she did. And I was a smart student in those days, and I used to participate in class. And I didn't know the first thing about The Merchant in Venice. And then we started. And as soon as we started, the description of Shylock as this very greedy Jew, I started to shrink. I felt myself getting lower and lower in my desk. And there were a few Jewish students in our class. And I always wondered if all the other students who were not Jewish were snickering at us, and those students who were Jewish were not feeling a little bit ashamed, nervous, uneasy. It's unpleasant, especially for a teenager, to hear all these horrible, horrible descriptions of a Jew, which are so unpleasant. It's so disgusting and very stereotypical. Well, I remember suffering through that class, and I said, I'm never going to read Shakespeare again. Shakespeare's an anti-Semite. Later on, I realized Shakespeare isn't an anti-Semite. He was using a trope that was common among people. They thought of Jews in those terms. Shakespeare probably never met a Jew in his life. I don't think Jews were even living in England during his time. In any case, that event, that number of weeks that we were studying The Merchant of Venice, created a scar in me. I felt like I was branded. And it took a long time, and here I am so many years later, still feeling uncomfortable about that event, that class. And I was wondering, why is it that Jews are treated so poorly? Why is it that we were depicted in such ugly ways? And why do those stereotypes continue to impact modern times? Okay, so there are always anti-Semites or people who hate blacks or people who hate whites. All kinds of people write what they write. But okay, you write about it and some people read it, some people throw it away. But the Jewish stereotype just went generation after generation after generation into our own time. It never goes away. And Jews somehow bear a burden. People don't even know who we are. They don't talk to us. They don't know who we are. And yet they portray us in such a vicious, negative way. And that creates its own energy. So the next generation of writers draws on those same stereotypes. And all they have to do is say Shylock, and Jews cringe, or they should cringe because it's such an ugly stereotype. Although Shylock had virtues. I'm not going to argue about the whole thing, but the overall impression of Shylock was very negative. No one wants to be called a Shylock. So if you go through literature, especially English, not especially, but also English literature, you find that the characterization of Jews is often very, very negative. Even side comments, or whenever they mention something, even we mentioned a few weeks ago about Matthew Arnold, who praised ancient Israel with great lavish praise. When it came to modern Jews, actual living Jews, he thought we were a very unamiable tribe. He didn't have much to say in a positive vein about real Jews. Okay, ancient Israelites, they had a concept of righteousness, but modern Jews, not so much. And if you look at the great Victorian English writers, they often made snide remarks, negative remarks. Some were okay. Thomas Babington Macaulay came out with a beautiful essay for Jews. There was a big argument during the 19th century whether Jews should have the right to vote in England. It was very controversial. Jews finally did win the right to vote and to be elected, but not without a lot of rancor, a lot of ugliness. Well, having this as a background, we now come to a novel, Daniel Deronda, which was the last novel written by an author named Georg Eliot. Surprise, surprise, she was actually a woman. Her real name was Mary Ann Evans. She lived from 1819 to 1880. She decided to write under a male name, not because there weren't other famous women writers, but she wanted to establish a separate identity, and she didn't want to be connected with her previous writings. She was very famous, apparently, as a translator. She wanted to create a new identity for herself, and she wrote many very popular novels. Daniel Deronda is the last one. Now, who is this Daniel Deronda? From the name itself, it sounds like he has Sephardic ancestry. Sounds like a Spanish name, and he probably had Spanish ancestry. But who is this guy? It's a huge novel, over 900 pages. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. If you've read it, God bless you. You deserve a gold medal. If you haven't read it, there's a movie made of it. You could watch the movie. And if not, you could listen to me and get a little précis of it. I'm not going to go through the whole novel, but there really made two main elements. This fellow, Daniel Deronda, as a little baby, he is adopted by an English gentleman named Hugo Mallinger. And he's a fine gentleman with a big estate, very wealthy. And he raises Daniel Deronda to be a fine English gentleman. Daniel Deronda is given the best education. He has the best circle of friends. Everything about him is classic 19th century, successful English, non-Jewish, Christian English society, nobility. He had everything going for him, but he was a little confused. He was a young man. He was still trying to find who he was, and he never knew who his parents were. He thought, and many people thought, that he was the illegitimate child of Hugo Mallinger, and that's why Hugo took such good care of him. But that's what he always assumed. He used to think of Hugo as his uncle. That was a euphemism for being when they used to talk about a person who was an illegitimate father, they called him uncle. So he thought that's who he thought he was. So the story really revolves around Daniel Deronda and two different loves in his life. One love was a lady named Gwendolyn. And Gwendolyn is also a non-Jewish girl, a Christian girl, very willful, very stubborn, but very pretty, very pretty. And they have an odd relationship. She, more than he, she basically falls in love with him. She's attracted to him. He thinks he's a character. He kind of stands off. He's a little different from everybody else that she's met. She lives a screwy life. She ends up marrying a person that she can't stand. I'm not going to go into all the details of her marriage. And he ends up dying. And she really wants to come back and marry Daniel. But one day, Daniel is still a young man, and he's rowing along the Thames River. And he sees a young lady on the banks, either about to commit suicide or just tried to commit suicide. And he goes and he rescues her. He doesn't know who she is. And I guess she's 19, 20, something like that, young lady. And he decides to take her to friends of his, who are Christian home, to warm her up, give her some warm clothing, give her some food, and then they'll take care of her for a while till she could figure out how to go ahead with her life. It turns out this young lady is a Jewish young lady named Mira Lapidot. And Mira is very pretty, of course, has to be pretty, and she has a beautiful voice, and she's very cultured, but she has a horrible story about her past. What's the story? Mira, as a little girl, she had a mother, a father, and a brother. The father was a nasty fellow and kidnapped Mira, took her to America, and taught her to be an actress. And that's how she made money. At some point, the father was a scoundrel, he was Jewish, and he was a Jewish scoundrel. And at some point, he was going to just sell her into prostitution. And she didn't like that idea, so she decided to try to escape, go back to England, and find her mother and her brother. In the process of going back to England, she doesn't even know where to find them. She goes to she's in London, but how is she going to find her? There's many years have gone by between the time she was a little girl to where she is now. She doesn't know who they are. Only she knows that her brother's name was Ezra Cohn. So to make a long story short again, the family kind of adopts her. She takes music lessons. She becomes popular, and Daniel falls in love with her. But she's Jewish, and not only is she Jewish, she's very pious. She doesn't know much about Judaism because her father wasn't religious, But she remembers as a little girl, her mother was a religious woman, and the religion was very central to her. So the idea of her marrying out of the faith was repugnant. She wouldn't even think of that. But she also had an attraction for Daniel. But look, they're from different tribes. She was Christian. She was Jewish and he was Christian, and never the path shall cross. But Daniel decides, I'm going to try to find out if I could find her mother and brother. So he goes through the old Jewish neighborhoods in London, and he goes look at all the stores, and he sees a store, and the name of the proprietor is Ezra Cohen. What a coincidence! Wow. So he goes into the store, and Ezra Cohen turns out to be somebody altogether different. It couldn't possibly be the brother of Mira. But there's another man in the store, older man, and named Mordechai. And Mordechai is a kind of a mystic, thinker, very sickly man, but there's something special that attracted Daniel to him. They started talking with each other, and Daniel kept on coming back. And Mordechai at one point says, Daniel, I'm dying, but I have a great dream. My dream is for the restoration of the Jewish people. We have to have our own land. We have to have our own place. We don't want to be constantly guests of other people who don't even like us. We need our own place. And I need somebody to be my successor and take over my dream because I'm dying. Daniel says, look, God bless you. I really have nothing to do with you. That's a separate thing. I'm a Christian. I'm nothing to do with your dream. I wish you success, but I'm not your successor. Don't put it on me. I can't accept that. But Daniel starts reading about Judaism, and he starts feeling a kinship with Mordechai. Turns out that Mordechai's real name was Ezra Mordechai Cohen. So he was Ezra Cohen. And it turns out that the mother had passed away years ago. So he makes a family reunion between Mira and Mordechai, and they're very happy together, and they're very happy to reunite. Okay. In the meantime, one day Hugh Mallinger calls Daniel into his office and says, Daniel, I have a letter here, and I want you to read it. And the letter comes from someone saying, I am your mother. The mother signs her name, the Princess Helm Eberstein. Ooh, fancy name. She's a princess, a German princess. Please meet me in Genoa at such and such a date in such and such a hotel. So Daniel, I didn't know I have a mother. I don't know where she is. Hugh says, look, you got this letter, you go to Genoa and you meet her. So he goes. And she's dying also, as it turns out. And she says she grew up in a home where the father was very, very religious Jew, but he made life very oppressive for her. First of all, he wanted sons, he didn't want a daughter. And then he made her do all kinds of observances she couldn't understand. She resented being Jewish, she hated being Jewish. And she became an actress, and she was very successful, very popular. And one of her admirers was Hugh Mallinger, this Englishman. He fell in love with her. So this mother of Daniel was married to a cousin that she hated. She had a baby, and the cousin died. So she's stuck with a little baby. She wants to be an actress. And what's she gonna do with this baby boy? So she says to Hugh Mallinger, you love me? Yes. I can't marry you. I got another life. I have a life of my own. Take my son, raise him as your own, but don't let him know he's Jewish. Raise him as a Christian. Raise him as an Englishman. Don't let him have any concept of his past. So she says to Daniel, I tried all these years to keep this from you because I thought being Jewish is a curse. I wanted you to be raised as a good Englishman to have a good future. However, now that I'm about to die, my father's voice kept coming back to me. I feel guilty that you have a heritage, and even though I can't stand the heritage, it belongs to you, and I don't want to rob you of that. And your grandfather's books and his religious items, they're with some certain person in Germany. Go there, pick them up, they belong to you. So this is like a bolt of lightning to Daniel Deronda. So he says to his mother, you mean I am Jewish? She says, just forget it. I don't want you to be Jewish, but you happen to have Jewish blood, but you don't have to identify that way. You're being raised, no one knows you're Jewish. You just keep it to yourself. It's your little secret. My secret? I want to be Jewish. I'm proud to be Jewish. How could you deprive me of something that's so important to me? She says, you're nuts. Being Jewish is a burden. It's a curse. Everyone hates us. Why do it that way? So she ended up, after her first husband died, the father of Daniel, she ended up ultimately marrying this German nobleman and living as a non-Jewish. She was very happy. Anyway, Daniel now comes back, and now guess what? He realizes he can marry Mira because she's Jewish and he's Jewish. So he tells them, Mordechai, that he's Jewish. And Mordechai says, I knew you were Jewish all along. That's why I was teaching you all these things. That's why I knew you would be my successor. I knew you were Jewish. How did you know I was Jewish? There's something, there's just a little Jewish something in you. I knew that you were Jewish. Okay. So towards the end of the novel, he meets again with Gwendolyn, who's still in love with him. Her husband now has died, and she would like very much, I think, to marry Daniel. And Daniel says to her, you know what? I'm Jewish. She said, what? You're Jewish? Yes, I'm Jewish. Not only am I Jewish, I have accepted upon myself the dream of Mordechai, and I'm going to marry Mira, and we're going to go to the east. They made Aliyah. This is in the 1800s. She said, but Daniel, she says, there's no but, this is what's going to happen. And she says, I will always have a warm spot in my heart for you. You've helped me be a better person. Okay, fine. So the novel basically ends with him and Mira living happily ever after, and they're going to the promised land. This book not only portrays Daniel Deronda in a fairly positive way, and Mordechai is almost a saint, and Mira also is a beautiful, intelligent, musical, wonderful person. Here we have Jewish characters who actually are nice and desirable and wonderful and virtuous and idealistic and intelligent. This was something amazing. Not only was it amazing, it was written by a non-Jewish author. And if you read the book carefully from beginning to end, she must have done a lot of homework. She got a lot of the customs right. She must have read a lot about Judaism, because when she describes things, she describes it fairly accurately, as if almost only an insider could have written this book, but she wasn't an insider. But she had a very good sense of what it was all about. When the Jews read this book, they went wild. Wow, here's a non-Jewish author talking about Jews in a positive way. And not only that, talking about a Jewish homeland. Now, this is before Theodor Herzl. But some of the people who started reading her book, they had, maybe she has something there. Maybe she's right. And this was considered to be a stepping stool towards the increased interest in the idea of Zionism. Her book was read, it was translated right away into Italian, French, Hebrew, Yiddish, and Russian. I mean, she had a big audience besides English readers. People were interested. And she posed some interesting questions. And I want to just go back and talk about some of those questions. Let's talk about the Zionist thing first. Well, you know what? Let's talk about the Zionist thing first. Of course, in the 19th century, the most famous Jew or person of Jewish ancestry was Benjamin Disraeli. Disraeli was converted by his father to Christianity when he was just before his bar mitzvah. But he never renounced his Jewish identity, even though he was formally a Christian. And everyone called him a Jew because his name was Disraeli and because everyone knew he was Jewish. But he was a practicing Christian. He married a Christian. He lived as a Christian. He believed in the Church of England. But when it came to his writings, he was as staunch a Jew as you'll ever find. Here's a quotation from one of his novels called Alroy. You ask me what I wish. This is a Jewish character talking to a non-Jewish character. My answer is a national existence, which we have not. You ask me what I wish. My answer is the land of promise. You ask me what I wish. My answer is Jerusalem. You ask me what I wish. My answer is the temple, all we forfeited, all we have yearned for, all of which we might have fought, our beauteous country, our holy creed, our simple manners, our ancient customs. You don't just write that casually. Disraeli, I believe, really felt that way. And here's a fellow who became the Prime Minister of England, who has this very strong feeling that Jews have to have their own land. It doesn't mean Jews all should leave England. He didn't say Jews should leave the diaspora. but he believed that Jews should have their own land. There's a novel, his most famous novel, Jewish-wise, was called Tancred, about an English nobleman, a young man, who decided he wanted to go to the Holy Land to learn more about Christianity and about the traditions of the church. And when he went there, it was during Sukkot time, and he was brought by a guide, and the guide was Jewish, and he came to a home of some people who were Jewish, and they had a sukkah. And he asked this non-Jewish visitor, Tancred, what's this all about? What are you sitting outside eating in a sukkah for? And they told him that we're celebrating the harvest. What harvest? It's a desolate land. There's no harvest. So he said. So the answer was, yes, but we had a harvest years ago, and we lived in these bowers. They call the sukkah a bower, and we every year this season we celebrate the vintage. We celebrate the harvest, even though we're not farmers and even though we don't have vines, but we celebrate. So here's what Tancred says: the vineyards of Israel have ceased to exist, but the eternal law enjoins the children of Israel still to celebrate the vintage. A race that persists in celebrating their vintage, although they have no fruits to gather, will regain their vineyards. Oh boy. Disraeli is saying, and Tancred is amazed. In other words, Jews are not dead. Jews are not just a vestige of the past. They're not just ancient Israelites. They're real living flesh and blood Jews who believe in it, who are living it. And Disraeli is presenting it in a very positive way. Not only a positive way, he kind of jabs the Christian world. He says in a number of his novels, he says, who is a superior race? The race that provided the religious foundations or the religion that took the religious foundations? The answer is the Jews are superior. We gave you all your Bible. We gave you your laws. We gave you your literature. So who are the superior people? Us. And then in his novel called Coningsby, he has a character very much like Mordechai, by the way, in George Eliot's book. He says as follows: all of us encounter, at least once in our life, some individual who utters words that make us think forever. There are men whose phrases are oracles, who condense in a sentence the secrets of life, who blurt out an aphorism that forms a character or illustrates an existence. A great thing is a great book, but greater than all is the talk of a great man. And who was this great man? This great man was a Jew named Sidonia. And Disraeli goes on to describe Sidonia as a person who has exhausted all the sources of human knowledge. He was a master of the learning of every nation, of all tongues, dead or living, of every literature. Sidonia looked upon life with a glance rather of curiosity than content. His religion walled him out from the pursuits of a citizen. His riches deprived him of the stimulating anxieties of a man. He perceived himself as a lone being, alike without cares and without duties. Sidonia, quotation marks, a Jew, a successful Jew, financially successful, was always alone. As a Jew, he was brilliant, he read a lot, he understood a lot, but there was still a wall between him and the rest of society. He couldn't quite get into the rest of society. He could afford to buy himself good food, he could live in a nice house. Nevertheless, he was alone. Sidonia, again, emphasizes the greatness of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people continue to live. Now let's go back again to Daniel Deronda. Daniel Deronda is a young man who actually has an absolutely free choice. He was raised by Hugo Mallinger to be an English gentleman. He had the proper education, he was good looking, he had the proper yichus, his uncle, so to speak, this Hugh Mallinger, could set him up in society perfectly well. He could marry this beautiful Gwendolyn. He really had every option in the world to claim his life as a Christian and to be successful at it. And only reason he thought he was Jewish is because this mother came. Maybe he could also doubt that she was really the mother. Whatever it is, he could have denied it. He could have said, look, put it back in the corner. I don't want to know anything about it. But he chose to be it. And that's what's important. George Eliot was saying it's possible for Jews in this day and age to have a legitimate choice between being an English gentleman and being an outcast Jew, and to choose being an outcast Jew. And you know what? It could be a very intelligent choice. Why? Because Jews have something valuable. They have a terrific heritage, a terrific history, a terrific belief. And not only that, they're not a dead nation at all. They're a living nation. Not only a living nation currently, but they have a dream of returning to their land. And they're going to return to the land, and they're going to make a great land out of it. And they're going to have a great society. Judaism isn't just a fossil from the past. It's alive, living, and has a future. This was something new for people to think about. Not only for Christians, but even Jews. This was something very, very profound. The question is being Jewish a blessing or a curse, a burden, or both? So last year we had a session on a Tunisian French writer, Albert Memmi. Albert Memmi was a very famous writer. He just died last year. He died at the age of 99. He grew up in Tunisia in a ghetto. He broke away from the ghetto. He became a famous French. He moved to Paris. He became a very famous French writer and one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. Here's what he writes. I do not believe I have ever rejoiced in being a Jew. When I think of myself as a Jew, I am immediately conscious of a vague spiritual malaise, warm, persistent, always the same, that comes over me. The first thing that strikes me when I think of myself as a Jew is that I do not like to consider myself in that light. I can hardly think of any Jew who is natural and sure of himself. Ashamed or bragging, persecuted or proud, Jewishness can never be anything but tormented. Well, this guy really had a rough intellectual life. Some of us actually don't mind being Jewish. Some of us actually like being Jewish. And Daniel Deronda liked being Jewish, apparently. But Albert Memmi, I don't think he'd be dismissed because he carried a burden which all Jews knowingly or unknowingly carry. Some of us carry the burden, but we have so much positive baggage within us. So they made fun of me when I was in high school. They called me Shylock. Okay, so there, I know it. Everyone doesn't love me. I know that there are white supremacists who would like to kill me. I know that there are Arab militants that would like to destroy Israel. I know all of those things. It is a burden, doesn't go away. But I have enough positive elements within me that give me strength to carry the burden. Which person in life doesn't have some burden? Everyone has things to worry about, So everyone has someone who hates them. Jews have had a longer history, maybe. We have a lot of things to worry about. I like to quote the famous passage, what's a Jewish telegram? Start worrying, details to follow. In other words, we always have something to worry about. We may not know all the details right now, but there's always something to worry about. Understood. But we also have pride in ourselves. We have connection with ourselves. The problem with Albert Memmi is he grew up in a ghetto where his family lived in great poverty, where there was a sharp separation between Arab society and Jewish society, and where Jews were treated in a very, very negative way. And as he got more and more educated in the Western way, he said, why should we be oppressed? Why should Jews keep living like this? The Jews themselves might have been happy where they were. They might, in their own mind, made peace with their subservient status. But he already tasted freedom, and he thought that the Jewish ghettoization was a great curse. So he joined, by the way, the Tunisian liberation movement when Tunisia was trying to break away from their colonial powers. But the more he and some young Jews tried to participate, the more the Muslims pushed him aside. We don't want Jews here. This isn't your country. What do you mean not my country? My family's been living here for hundreds of years. You're strangers, you're aliens, you're Jews. He could never get away from that. So when in France, even though he was very successful, he married a non-Jewish woman. He wrote much about Judaism, much about colonialization. He could never get over the fact that being Jewish was a burden. Here's something else he wrote. I came to discover a fundamental truth. The ghetto was also inside the Jew. It was more than a stone wall and wooden doors, more than a collective prison imposed by others. It was an inner wall, real and symbolic, which a Jew had built. Jewish tradition is a continuous meditation on a collective tragedy. Whew. I want to just segue a bit to modern Jews who are much more confident. We have a state of Israel. Even in the diaspora, we have a lot of freedom. And even though we have burdens, we have a lot of threats, a lot of challenges, and life is not absolutely without trouble. Nevertheless, there's a certain confidence in Jews today and hopefulness among Jews today. Nevertheless, if we look and see what kind of institutions the Jews have created, not just for ourselves, not schools and synagogues, but what kind of institutions have we created for society at large that have a Jewish flavor to them, I think we'll find that the majority of them deal with the Holocaust. And that's interesting in itself. There are Holocaust memorials all over the place, the Holocaust museums, Holocaust statues, Holocaust Day. And I'm the first one to say we should never forget the Holocaust. Nonetheless, what did Memi say? Jewish tradition is a continuous meditation on collective tragedy. We focus a lot on a collective tragedy. It was a tragedy. I'm not going to diminish that whatsoever. And we have every right and every responsibility to maintain that. But also, in the back of my mind, I worry a little bit about this emphasis on the Holocaust, especially as it goes to the public in Europe and everywhere else. I don't think the non-Jews like to be reminded that they're murderers, even though many of them, their parents and grandparents were murderers, or at least allowed the murder to take place. I don't think it makes them feel more compassionate towards the Jews. And I think what you hear from some of these miserable racists is Hitler didn't finish the job. Sometimes people, when they hear about the Holocaust, they don't feel sympathy. They feel, we should have done more. Now I want to go back to my public school experience. In 9th grade, I was in Sharpless Junior High School, and they showed a movie about the Holocaust. And this movie, like a documented newsreel, and there are piles and piles of Jewish bodies. And instead of feeling sympathy, I was a Jewish kid, and my father's brother and family were living in the island of Rhodes. They were all killed. We knew about it firsthand. My feeling was, I was ashamed. I was ashamed. Jews let themselves die like that? Jews let themselves get piled up like dead bodies and there was no one, they didn't defend themselves? I was a 9th grader. What they showed us a movie to try to give us a sense of sympathy and what could happen because of racism backfired. Instead of me feeling, I'm so sympathetic, I wish this never happened again, I said, why did it happen in the first place? What's wrong with us? I didn't say what's wrong with those bums who killed us. I don't know what non-Jewish kids thought. Some of them may have thought, who cares, people dying, they die every place, they die in Africa, they die in Asia, everyone's dying. Who cares if Jews die? I don't know how educational it was. I once heard a talk by the late Jonathan Sachs, and he said, teaching Holocaust is very important. But when we tell our children about all the millions of people that were killed, do we think they're going to say, great, I'm so proud to be a Jew? Or do they say, this is a burden I can't carry? Wouldn't we like to follow the example of Daniel Deronda's mother and say, let's just stop right here. Raise the kids as a non-Jew, get out of it. Save the children, save your grandchildren from the threats. I don't have a simple answer, yes and no. But it feels intuitively that the Jewish community as a community spends too much time and money on death and commemorating the dead instead of on building the inner pride and the inner strength to make us feel stronger and happier with what we are. In other words, we see today Jews vote with their feet. Those who are devoted and willing to carry the burden, they're very good Jews. But there are many who are on the borderline where they decide, you know what, I'd rather marry out, I'd rather raise my kids not as Jews. We live in a free society. And even in Israel, people make choices, even though they're Jewish, most of the Jewish Israelis are Jewish, they still make a commitment whether I'm Jewish because I'm loyal to this country, and I would be loyal to the United States if I lived there, I'd be loyal to France if I lived there, just a nationalism, or if there's a basic Judaism that goes with it, a religious content that goes with it. All of these thoughts come to mind in reading Daniel Deronda. So George Eliot, to her credit, was willing to deal with a topic which was not fashionable in Victorian England. And she handled it in a way that did not dismiss Jewish negative types. I mean, there was Mira's father was a scoundrel, willing to sell her into prostitution. And there were other negative comments about Jews scattered here and there throughout the book. But the overall tone, if you read the book, is Jews are intelligent, good, idealistic. They also have a right to live, and they have a right to their own land. And Daniel Deronda ultimately makes a choice. And that choice is, I am a Jew. I freely choose that identity rather than the identity in which I grew up. I'm going to move to the Far East. I'm going on Aliyah, and I'm going to help carry out Mordechai's dream to build a Jewish homeland. So these are some of the thoughts that come through by reading this book. They're not about theology so much as about identity, about Jewish confidence, about idealism, about the ability to form a future for our people and to stand up against the burdens and the sufferings which plague us. So we're going to stop at that for today. Next week will be the last in this particular series. We're going to do